To begin with, we must be clear, there has been more than one flood in the history of our planet. Some were natural events in Gaia's evolution, while others were instigated. One such flood happened when Tiamat was destroyed in the Titan War. In this paper, we are going to be concerned with the mechanics behind the flood that most historians say happened around 11,000 BC, which is 13,000 years ago, half a cycle around the zodiac. Most researchers, but not all, agree that in general terms, Enlil was the one who decided to eradicate mankind, and from studying the sources available, it's no doubt that the specific Enlil that is supposedly responsible is Khan Enlil himself, the Orion Queen's consort, the king of the Orion Empire. The readers, who have read previous papers, understand by now that when the texts address Enlil, the majority of the time they are addressing Khan Enlil, without being aware that this is the case. Hence, it seems that Khan Enlil ordered the flood to happen, and though we are aware of this, we really don't understand the reason behind such a strange decision. Isn't this genocide? Why did Khan Enlil want Gaia to be flooded? Thus, let us hear the gods out, Khan Enlil, Prince Ninurta, and Lord Enki in particular, and let's start with a passage from Enuma Elish. When Khan Enlil had had enough of what was going on here on Gaia, he and Queen Nin summoned a council somewhere up in Orion, and Lord Enki was invited, and he actually attended. In this passage of Atrahasis, Tablet I, Khan Enlil is reminding Enki that he slaughtered one of his good workers as a sacrifice for the new plan, which was to create the human hybrid race, who was going to take over the work in the mines from the alien invader force workers and accomplish other chores for the gods. Such barbarism was not tolerated in the Orion Empire. However, if we read the sentence really carefully, it says that Enki slaughtered a god together with his intelligence. Haven't we learned what this means? It means that not only was this god slaughtered physically, but his avatar was apparently destroyed as well. The god became space dust. In simple terms, he basically ceased to exist as an individual, both in physical and metaphysical form. The fire has nowhere to go when the avatar light body is destroyed, and eventually, the fire dissolves and becomes one with the universe, without individual consciousness and awareness. Later on, Khan Enlil wants Enki to swear an oath to have his creations reversed, meaning destroyed, so that everything, after the flood, can start all over from the beginning. Enki refuses, not being willing to destroy his people, and a flood must be Khan Enlil's kind of work because the Khan is also the lord of airways and of weather. Irakal in the text is another name for Nergal, which again is another name for Enki, see previous papers. This specific quote doesn't mention that Enki actually agreed to take the oath, however. Regardless of what we think about this decision to flood the earth, Enki was very fast to break his oath, and thus acting deceitfully toward the council. This was of course not the first time this happened, but it clearly shows that Enki was not to be trusted. He agreed to take the oath, and if he didn't want to have anything to do with the flood, he might have considered not taking it. Was he too pressured and intimidated to say no? Hardly. On the contrary, it must have been in Enki's interest to have the gods of the council save his creation, as his life may have depended upon it. If the council decided to wipe out everything he had engineered, Enki could no longer hide behind his creation. He must have known this and that his life was now in danger. Enki, most probably, attended the council meeting remotely, via satellite, which means he could have been located hundreds of light years from Orion and still participate. We know that the gods often communicated via crystals. Nevertheless, it seems as if Enki was not on Earth when he communicated with the council because he returned to Earth after the meeting was over. As soon as Enki was back on Earth, he warned Utnapishtim, also known as Noah and Atrahasis, amongst other names, about the flood, something that would be considered a break of the oath he had taken before the council. However, instead of openly telling Utnapishtim what the council had decided, he tried to go around the problem by speaking to the wall outside Utnapishtim's cabin instead of with Utnapishtim in person, being well aware that Utnapishtim would hear every word Enki said to the wall, see the quote above. It is of course quite clever, but not exactly ethical. Later in this section, I will go deeper into this whole wall communication. We all know the general story, how Enki told Utnapishtim to build an ark, in which he would store the DNA of all the relevant races, plants, and animals on Earth, so these could be restored later. Utnapishtim was also told to save himself and his family. This part of the story we are going to look into more in a moment, but first, I want to look into the character of Lord Enki. The tale of Utnapishtim and the Ark is told in an epic called the Atrahasis Tablets, which include both the creation story and the flood account. Tablet 3 discusses the deluge, while Tablet 2 is a story about how Enlil sent a famine and a drought on Earth in 1,200 years intervals in order to wipe out mankind, or parts of mankind, and all other versions of Enki's creatures, before the flood was even considered. Not until at the end of Tablet 2 is the flood mentioned. All in all, Tablet 2, in particular, portrays Enlil as a very evil, angry, and emotionless character, while Enki is portrayed as the good guy. Could this be, and forgive me if I seem cynical now, as Wikipedia says, because it was Enki's priests who wrote and copied the story? Both Enki and Marduk were notorious for making changes to the ancient record, as we have learned. Once again we're told that Enki was bound to an oath, which he broke. Tablet 2 begins with more overpopulation of humans and the god Enlil sending first famine and drought at formulaic intervals of 1,200 years to reduce the population. In this epic Enlil is depicted as a nasty capricious god while Enki is depicted as a kind helpful god, perhaps because priests of Enki were writing and copying the story. Tablet 2 is mostly damaged, but ends with Enlil's decision to destroy humankind with a flood and Enki bound by an oath to keep the plan secret. We must remember, for the record, that Enki has been deceitful many times before this incident, so we can rightfully add this characteristic to his personality. If we put ourselves in Enki's Lucifer's shoes, wouldn't it be fair to suspect that he was the one who created the bad feelings amongst the gods, whose task it was to mine the gold and precious stones in the beginning because Enki wanted them to rebel? Learning how he talked to the wall in order not to break the oath, wouldn't it be fair to think that Enki, using this same side of his character, thought he would be justified in creating a hybrid race if the miners rebelled? Wouldn't it be logical to think that Lucifer may have wanted to create the human hybrid race, not so much because he wanted them to be miners, although this was something he could use them for as well, but because he needed soldiers as well as vessels, into which his imprisoned cohorts and Sirius could incarnate, and thus escape from their prison? He needed women in particular, but in order for them to reproduce, he also created males. My hypothesis here becomes self-evident when we look at what Enki actually did, which was exactly what I just said. Dr. Joseph Farrell comes to a similar conclusion and writes in his book. It is clear from the Atrahasis however, that at least one motivation for the deluge, as far as the Mesopotamian tradition is concerned, is the overpopulation of the earth by the new hybrid race. Perhaps Enki's seeming beneficence to Atrahasis and the human race was just that, seeming beneficence. Perhaps he had plans to use the revolt among the human workers to further his own power. In any case, it seems that the Atrahasis is more than a mere epic, for it hints at dark designs and agendas at work in the pantheon, and moreover clearly suggests that mankind, whether in hybrid form or not, is perhaps both battlefield and prize in a much larger cosmic conflict. As we can see, I am not alone in seeing through Enki's manipulative and hideous character. It is easy for Enki to make Enlil look like a monster, using the flood as a justification for doing so. The problem we normally have when we're talking about these gods is that we are basing our knowledge on records that were written by scribes, who in turn, were priests in Enki's hierarchy. If you were Enki, would you tell us the truth? Of course not. Why would you? It would contradict your agenda. There was a time when Enki's experiments here on Earth became too disruptive and too disturbing to witness by the Orion Council. For many thousands of years, they had left Enki alone because they knew that if they interfered, Enki would kill off his creation, and with him also the remnants of Queen Ins and Prince Ninurta's creation. This, they were very hesitant to do. On the other hand, it came to a point when what Enki and his cohorts did on Earth apparently became a threat also to the rest of our galactic sector. During the later Atlantic era, man had already reached the moon and traveled to other planets and celestial bodies in the solar system, of course under the guidance and guardians of the gods. This became a real threat to other star races because they could easily anticipate what Enki could do with a relatively ignorant human race under his command. First, the human race was not mentally ready to travel in space, and if Enki taught them to nano-travel, the Orionites were not the only star race that was concerned. Second, the creatures Enki had created on Earth were often failed experiments that he didn't care about, but instead left to evolve on their own, causing confusion and violence on the planet. Worse than that, however, was if these beings were allowed into space as well. Many peaceful star races felt threatened by this. There were, in other words, more than one star race who wanted something to be done about it, and the Orion Council felt quite pressured. Both the Khan, the Queen, and Prince Ninurta would highly dislike to see the remnants of their original creation destroyed, and with them perhaps the whole living library, but they more and more came to the conclusion that they might have to intervene in one way or another. Some humans had already figured out how to use crystals for time travel, communication, and space travel, but without having any ethical and moral codes following with such freedoms. In addition, there were also humans who had learned to create life forms, just as their chief god, Poseidon, Enki, had done, and still did. Whether we agree or not, it's important to understand why the Aryan Empire came to the decision where they had to tell Enki to take the oath to destroy his creations. It is doubtful if the Aryan Council actually for even one moment thought that Enki would do this, but they had to act according to their laws and regulations, just as we do, and order him to take this action. If I would sum it up, the following would be the main reasons why the gods decided to terminate life on Earth. 1. Enki's genetic experimentation went out of hand. It was very painful for the queen, the king, and the prince of Orion to see their former paradise turn into a cosmic zoo, with a lot of abominable beings wandering around, sometimes aimlessly, on the planet, eating each other, but also killing and eating humans. There were experiments which Enki had created in a hurry, realizing his mistakes, but didn't care to do anything about them. The Aryan Council saw the complete irresponsibility in such actions, and they could not see an end to it. 2. Overpopulation. The planet just before the flood was apparently highly overpopulated, and this is probably the reason for Khan Enlil's classic comment, where he said to the council, "Because of their humans' noise I am disturbed, because of their tumult I can't get any sleep." This is erroneously interpreted as if Enlil was physically present on Earth, but what it really implies is that in his mind Khan Enlil was disturbed by what Enki had done, and thinking about it gave him no rest. Humanity, and all other creations on Earth, were basically destroying the planet with everything that comes with overpopulation. 3. Humanity became a threat. Other star races became quite concerned with how mankind evolved. They could see them using nuclear weapons against each other, and the star races were afraid that mankind would take their warlike manners with them out in space. No one needed another violent colonizing race in this sector of the galaxy. There were those who could see through many of Enki's plans and anticipated how he would use humans as foot soldiers to expand his own empire. The more clever races wanted to stop this from happening. Enki needed to be stopped and not allowed to fulfill his plans, which otherwise would affect many star races in this sector of the universe and beyond. 4. Terminate. Ion became the last resort. For eons, the Orions had held themselves back to avoid another, even larger cosmic war than was already being fought, and had been ongoing since Lucifer's rebellion. Now it had come to the point where the council had decided that termination, as the last resort, had to be the solution. I believe that Enki was not prepared for such a decision from the council and was more or less put up against the wall. He believed that he had no other choice than to accept to take the oath but never intended to keep it. He also knew that with the destruction of mankind, his own safety was at stake. He had always hid himself behind humans, saying that if something happened to him, he would destroy the whole species. Now, when the council had decided that destruction was the only solution, Enki needed to be careful because they could capture him at any time and put him to trial, and from what I can see, this is exactly what the council planned, as a part of the whole scenario. However, Enki managed to escape again, and I will get into how he did it later on in this paper. Atrahasis Tablet 2, which brings up Khan Enlil's discontent with the human overpopulation, describes that his first order of action against Enki's creation was to let loose the disease, a plague, over the earth to take care of the overpopulation. It seems that this first action was a milder verdict, which would save some of humanity, but affect a large part of it, so that the overpopulation at least would be taken care of. The plague was let loose on the planet, and many people died. Utnapishtim/Atrahasis went to Enki and asked for help. Enki told him that the people needed to stop praying to their personal gods and instead make sacrifices to the plague god, who in the tablet is called Numtur. Apparently, people started doing so, and Numtur became so ashamed that he stopped the plague. Moreover, it seems that Khan Enlil ordered Numtur to start the plague. But who is Numtur? It proves to be quite interesting to start researching who Numtur is. We soon find out that he is the son of Enlil, Khan Enlil, and associated with death in the underworld. He is also married to a goddess of the underworld, who is named Husbisog. Hence, when we take a look at Husbisog, we find out that she sure enough is a goddess of the netherworlds. Although the names have changed, this sounds suspiciously similar to the goddess Ereshkigal and Nergal Enki himself. So, in the light of things, we can suspect with quite some certainty that Enki was playing the trickster again. In other words, Khan Enlil was telling his son, Numtur/Enki to start the plague. Utnapishtim became tormented when he saw how people were treated and asked Enki, his supposed father, for help. Enki saw how he could take advantage of the situation and strengthen his own position by asking a majority of people to pray to him and give him sacrifices. Historically, such sacrifices are basically blood rituals from which Enki could gain power and strength. Then he stopped the plague that he was ordered to spread to its completion. Thus, this was, from what it seems, the first council decision that he broke. Afterwards, he blamed Nimtar, who probably was a fictional god, for starting the plague. This fits with what we've discussed earlier. Enki wanted to be worshipped as the one and only god, and by playing the trickster again, he managed to get a big part of the population to worship him. Let's take a deeper look at what Enki was doing here. He was agreeing with the council to reduce the population and even started spreading the plague. Then, when people began to complain, he told them to stop praying to the Orion gods, or any other god or goddess they may worship, and concentrate all worship on Nimtar, a possible fictional god, who most likely was an alias for Enki himself. Thus, Enki stopped the plague after having received all this energetic power from mankind and immediately became the good guy both as Enki and Nimtar, because it was Enki who Utnapishtim came to when he needed help, and it was Enki who resolved the situation. Nimtar also won people's affection because he showed to have a conscience when he stopped the plague. In reality, it was Enki, who all along played a game with mankind and the council. About 1,200 years later, according to these same records, man had multiplied again to such an extent that it started concerning Enlil. This time he decided on a drought to reduce their numbers. Hence he let the thunder rain god, Adad, stop and hold back the rain so the land became dry and without water. Again, Utnapishtim came to Enki for advice, and again, Enki gave the same advice as he did earlier and told him to tell the people to worship the one god who is holding back the rains. Adad, just as Nimtar did, became ashamed and let the rain start falling again. Adad is an interesting character if we look him up, and it seems as if the scribes have had a hard time identifying him correctly. This is probably not the scribes' fault because they only wrote down what they were told, but it looks as if Adad, like Nimtar, was one of these gods who was used by the greater gods, Red Enki, when they needed someone else to be responsible for what they were doing. Interestingly enough, it's not hard to find this little quote. He is also occasionally son of Enlil. Does this mean that Adad is another alias for Enki? Well, if we look at the pattern here, it definitely seems that history is repeating itself, first Nimtar and now Adad. The Orion Council must be furious by now. Another 1,200 years went by, and the noise became almost unbearable. To apply a new solution, Father Enlil declared a general embargo of all nature's gifts. Anu and Adad were to guard heaven, Enlil the earth, and Enki the waters, to see that no means of nourishment reach the human race. In addition to this, he makes women infertile by letting the womb be too tight to let the baby out. This decisions of the gods apparently led to cannibalism, something that only the Nephilim giants had dedicated themselves to previously. The tablet is broken at this point, but the general interpretation is apparently that Enki ignored the decision by distributing a large quantity of fish for the population to eat. This made Enlil even more furious, so he decided to put an end to it once and for all and let a flood sweep over the planet and drown everything in its way. This was when Enki and the rest of the gods had to take an oath not to go against this final decision. Enki was ordered to execute the flood. Enki refused at first, asking his father why he would use his power to destroy his own creation, and that this was more in line with what Enlil would do, because Father Enlil is the Lord of nature, and has the power to create nature and destroy nature. Eventually, Enki agreed to take the oath anyway. However, he had no intention to keep it, at least not in the fashion in which it was decided, as we shall see, but in order not to overtly break it, he figured out a way to tell Utnapishtim about the council's decision without breaking the oath. Hence, he went to Utnapishtim's reed hut, made sure Utnapishtim was home, and started talking to the wall instead of directly to Utnapishtim himself. This way, he hadn't broken the oath by telling mankind about the flood, he only told it to a reed hut wall. Utnapishtim followed Enki's directions and built the ark, filling it with DNA of all significant species, including animals, humans, and plants, and got ready before the storms had built up to such a degree that the water started flooding the land. The goddess complained bitterly over Father Enlil's and Prince Enlil's shortcomings as decision-makers. Prince Ninurta had apparently sided with his father when it came to flooding the planet. She wept when she saw dead humans clog the river like dragonflies. She swore by the flies in her necklace that she would never forget the flood. Enlil, on the other hand, became furious when he realized that the DNA of the human race was preserved. He understood that only Enki could have been clever enough to once again override the orders from him and the council. Enki, assumingly from a safe haven, admitted to Enlil that he preserved the life forms on Earth by warning Utnapishtim and suggested that in the future it would be better to use a more humane form of population control, such as restricted birth control. Enki said that he had preserved the DNA of the version of humanity that had just been wiped out, and he intended to start all over, but apparently agreed with Father Enlil. The text is fragmented here, that 1/3 of the women would not be able to give birth successfully, a parasitic demon would snatch the baby from its mother's lap. Dr. Farrell and I are very suspicious about Enki's motives here when he constantly turned against the conch eel. It may look as if his beneficence to Utnapishtim is genuinely caring, but in reality, is it just a way to increase Enki's own power? Utnapishtim, after all, is Enki's own son with a human female, as the story states, so he's the perfect being to preserve for the new era after the flood. Also, when he fed the starving people with fish and had the nature gods withdraw their actions against nature, it created an opposite effect on the gods than one would have thought that Enki anticipated. However, Enki is after all Lucifer, forget not. And Lucifer is clever when it comes to manipulation, which is perhaps the trump card in all this drama. What if Enki actually, in his own way, silently agreed with Father Enlil that the result of his creation was chaos, and he wanted to start anew? This idea may not be as foreign as it may seem at first. Ponder it, and take what I've written in this paper into consideration. After all, Father Enlil did not want to terminate mankind to begin with, but let's say, for argument's sake, that Enki was the one who wanted to terminate mankind. How is this possible? Well, let's go back and see what really happened here. Enlil, despite other star races wish to terminate mankind, wanted to avoid this from happening. Instead, he decided on population control. Enki, who had gotten tired of what he had created and wanted to start from the beginning again, saw this whole thing as a great opportunity. Therefore, he sabotaged Eve's effort from the Orion Council to save the majority of mankind. Enki knew that if his plan succeeded, the council eventually would have to give in to the pressure from other star races and, indeed, would need to terminate mankind once and for all. Thus, when every attempt from the council had failed because Enki sabotaged their plans, they came up with the idea of a flood. Enki probably jumped for joy when he heard that but kept a straight face. Instead, he said something to the effect, "What flood? I don't even know what you're talking about. This is something for Enlil to instigate, not me." Thus, he swore himself free from this decision, pretending he didn't want to have anything to do with it, although he secretly did, and has since then been seen as humanity's friend. Then, however, Enlil wanted everybody to take an oath, so the project would not be sabotaged. Why would the Khan do that? He would do that because the council's plans had been sabotaged repeatedly by Enki in the past and now the Khan wanted to avoid this from happening again. Probably, the oath was not something Enki had foreseen, and therefore, it became a problem that he had to solve. Now he, Enki, had to take an oath to destroy mankind, and he did not want to go into the history books as a destroyer but as the savior. But, how would he accomplish this? Some might say that Enki warned Utnapishtim because of compassion for mankind, but was that really his motive? After all, he warned the one who is considered to have been Enki's hybrid son, Utnapishtim, but he didn't care to warn any other members of the human race, except his own minions, as we shall see. The average man, the slave race, he left to perish. The only thing Enki seemed to be concerned about was to save his purest bloodlines because he knew he could create new slaves later on. If that's called compassion, then Enki was indeed compassionate. Those who support Enki may say that he didn't have a choice, he was bound by an oath, and his hands were tied. I don't believe that for a moment. When I put two and two together, I see Enki showing his true face all too well. He tricked the council, and in the end, he got exactly what he wanted, a terminated mankind, and a chance to start anew. The council did not want to terminate mankind. Enki did. Now, there's another side story to all this. When Earth got her verdict and Enki knew that the flooding of Earth seemed inevitable, as a last attempt, Enki invited his brother, Ninurta, to come to Earth, in what he called a diplomatic meeting. Ninurta took his brother up on it and descended to Earth a short time before the flood. They met in the high mountainlands, which Enki knew that his brother loved the most here on Earth. He wanted Ninurta to feel comfortable and at home. There, Enki and Ninurta stood face to face again, looking at each other in silence at first. It was a calm day, as if Gaia had no idea what had been decided for her, and the weather was not as humid as down at sea level. Before the deluge, a canopy was covering the planet most of the time, but not always. People were actually able to see the stars and the asterisms because astrology was a great art back in those days, and many people were educated in it. Ninurta didn't say a word. He didn't like and he didn't trust his brother at all, especially after everything that had happened. However, at this time, whether it was desperation on Lucifer's part, or if he thought that his brilliance and manipulation abilities would have an impact on his brother, I don't know, the Shining One, Prince Lucifer, came out and started talking calmly and convincingly to Prince Ninurta. "Dear brother, you and I have had our disagreements, and we have been in combat with each other. You even deprived me of my manhood." Lucifer smiled. "None of that is important now. Let us leave that behind us. I admit that your creation was absolutely gorgeous, and the living library you started with our parents and those giants from Vega, the Vulcans, was ingenious. As you can see, I have kept it up. It is still here, my brother. However, my dream was to create a species that would reproduce sexually, as a mix of your womankind and my mankind. It was an experiment, just like yours. I was wild at the time, and I must admit, quite desperate. Of course, you understand that I was under deep pressure. I didn't agree with my parents' ways of seeing things, so I rebelled. After being thrown out, I came here for revenge, that is true. But once I'd taken over Eridu and things had calmed down, I saw the fantastic creation that was built here, and I thought, my goodness, this is magnificent. At that time, I had nothing in mind other than to improve it even more, if I could. I knew that's what you planned, anyway, and now that you are not here, well, you know, I tried to make it for you, but perhaps a little bit with my own state of art." Lucifer paused and looked at his brother. Ninurta stood in the same position as when Lucifer had started talking and looked his brother in his eyes. Ninurta's face expression was serious, but neutral. Lucifer had a hard time reading him, which made him slightly nervous. He continued, smiling. "Anyway, all that is in the past. I wish it could have been done differently. And in certain terms we can still change things around. I hate to fight you, my brother. It's not your fault that our father chose you instead of me, that he loved you more. Why wouldn't he? You are such an excellent warrior, and you've been taught well doing other things too. They never knew where they had me because I was different." Lucifer took a step forward and bent over to really look deep into his brother's eyes and said, "Let's not allow our father to destroy this beautiful creation. You and I can make a difference, you know. Look what I have created all by myself. All these creatures, all these animals and intelligent beings. Look at the Lulus, they follow every command, and they seldom complain anymore. They gladly help me. Not only that, look at the empire I've been building over the millennia. It's growing and growing. My son, Marduk, is doing a great job back in Draco. We are expanding. Soon we're bigger than Orion. See, I don't even have a name for my empire yet. I saved that for last, you see. I saved it for us, you and me. I've been waiting a long time for this moment, and it's very exciting for me. I want you and I to start working together. Don't you see? I've done all this without you, but how far do you think you and I would have reached if we'd worked in unison from the beginning? I bet that the Orion Empire would have been ours by now. Together, you have a way to do it, following Orion laws and rules." Instead, he asked Prince Ninurta to execute the order to flood Gaia. They both anticipated that Enki, despite the oath he'd been taking, would not destroy his creations. They also both understood that Enki planned to use his elite bloodline, possessing their shamanic power, and use tantric sex and other means to work tirelessly on finding the back door into Orion. They also understood that this was one of the major ways Lucifer had figured out he could conquer the Queen's and the Khan's empire. Therefore, in spite of any other reasons, the flood was inevitable. This elite bloodline had to be terminated to safeguard the empire. Unfortunately, as they saw it, there was no other way to do that but to terminate the entire human race and everything else on the planet. Everything else had failed. What then? What if Lucifer once again rose like a phoenix from the ashes and started anew? What good would the flood have done then? Khan Enlil revealed his plans, which had been brought up in the council meeting while Ninurta had been busy elsewhere, unable to attend. "Maybe Lucifer was right on one point," said Khan Enlil. "He once said that to flood the earth is a job for Enlil and not for him. After all, you and I are the lords of nature, aren't we? We can execute such things. We just have to bypass Lucifer. Go back there, my son, and do your duty. Also, keep your troops on watch on our side of the Saturn Stargate. Once the flood has begun, we will go in and take back Eridu. This is my gift to your mother. The star system shall be ours again, and we can start all over, without your brother and his legions present anymore. What do you say?" This was excellent news for Ninurta. He would love to recreate womankind again and restore the living library after the flood. His feeling of doom and gloom turned in a second into hope and excitement. He left the palace in a much better mood, now willing to execute the order. Little did Ninurta and the Khan know how far Enki's infiltration had gone, however. Enki had managed to infiltrate Satanya with his own loyal officers, who told him of Khan Enlil's plans, which gave Enki time to prepare and take actions. Enki told Utnapishtim to be ready with his ark in the next 7 days, and he'd better make it airtight because he was going to take Utnapishtim, his family, and the stored DNA, a plan the Aryan Empire knew nothing about, on a ride that his hybrid son would never forget. Once Enki got the message from his spies in Satanya, he quickly took action. Another thing he had planned to do was to free as many as possible of the Namos, his minions who were still trapped in the Sirius system. Indeed, he managed to get most of them out with the help from shamanic human females, who let the souls of these criminals enter their bodies via black magic rituals and tantric sex. Enki knew that the vessel template he had prepared for his trapped friends had to be rescued from the deluge, and optimally, the rest of his minions, who were already walking on the face of Earth. He was aware, however, that many of them probably couldn't be saved. There wasn't enough time, but it was irrelevant in a sense. As long as the souls who were trapped in Sirius could be taken out of there, he could give them new bodies after the flood. On the Ark, he still had the seed stored, so he could use it later. Knowing that it was impossible for the flood to cover the Earth entirely, Enki told his minions to move to higher grounds immediately and gave them the altitude which they needed to move to in order to survive, all from using Enki's mathematical skills. The Aryans had always been brilliant with numbers. A multitude of different soul types inheriting the Earth. Here's another side note. If we look at the human population from after the flood and up until our present time, we have a mix of souls here on Gaia, coming from many different places in the universe. Of course, we have the original, human souls, who were created here in our own solar system, and who never have been anywhere else but here on Earth, reincarnated over and over. Then we have the global elite, who consists of a mix of souls, originating from different places in the galaxy. Many of them are the criminals whom Enki rescued from the dark star in the Sirius system, while others are souls coming from other Lucifer-dominated star systems, such as Alpha Draconis, and others. Some of the global elite are also human souls, who are heavily corrupted and work for the system, which of course is Lucifer's own system. Then there are criminal souls from many different parts of the galaxy, who were dumped here when star races, who were fed up with their worst criminal souls, noticed that Earth was a prison planet, and that Enki was happy to take them on. This is also mentioned in Peter R. Farley's book, The Experiment. There were also others on the planet at that time who were outcasts from other planets. Just as Australia had started out as a penal colony for those deemed unfit for polite society in 18th century England, so too at times was Earth a dumping ground for those considered unwanted by the civilizations on their home planets. Also, we have a minority of Titan souls, who belong to the Titans who were killed here in the Titan War, and moreover, we have the souls of Namlu'u, who never got the chance to escape during the Solar War, when Lucifer took over the planet. They are very wise and loving souls, raising the frequency of everybody around them, being great teachers and spiritual beings, who have been living amongst us humans for millions upon millions of years. These souls originally came from Orion, and they have the fire of the Mother Goddess still burning inside of them in such a fashion that the rest of humanity can't miss it. Thus, when people say that Earth is a prison planet, and all the souls living here are criminal souls dumped here from elsewhere, they are either lying, or they don't know any better. Although it's true that criminal souls have been dumped here, most of mankind is innocent, and are just being manipulated by all these criminal elements. This is the sadness and the sorrow we sometimes feel deep inside, something we constantly carry with us. Even if we otherwise are happy and positive beings, we know that we don't belong amongst these criminal elements. We listen to the daily news and look around us, thinking, what am I doing here? I don't belong in this insanity. So don't listen to those who claim that we are all criminals. Also, we are not fallen, like some people say. I think we will hear more such nonsense in the near future. Lord Enki has his plans. After all, it's easy to recognize who these criminal souls actually are. They are the ones who can harm humans and animals without seeing anything wrong with it. They don't mind and even get off from torturing, killing, stealing, and cheating on other people. Some of them even get sexually aroused from it. They are the ones who propagate false friendships, and then they betray you, thinking nothing of it. If you are not fitting into these categories, you are definitely not one of the criminal souls. 40 days and 40 nights. So how was the deluge executed? Was it really Starship Nibiru, which happened to be in the neighborhood at the moment and instigated this global catastrophe? Was it the ice caps of the North and South Poles that burst because we were at the end of a major ice age? It is true that planet Gaia was at the end of an ice age when the flood occurred, but even if the polar ice broke and flooded the land, it wasn't enough to create such a dramatic effect, although it certainly must have contributed. Also, I have no other real indications that it was Nibiru that did it, other than Sechen's accounts, and other sources agreeing with his translations. The epics tell another story, which more correlates with what I've concluded in my research in general. To some degree, I think we can use the epics that are available to us, the ones we have already used, such as the Bible, the Atrahasis epic, and the Epic of Gilgamesh. They all tell a similar story. I will also use other sources, and list them in the endnotes, or footnotes if you're reading the PDF file, as we go along. Genesis states, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth, and the sluices of the sky broke open. The Gilgamesh epic says, the underworld footings collapsed, the dikes gave away, and a tempest swept the land. From reading Genesis in the Bible and the other two epics, it seems that it started with heavy rains which lasted for weeks, maybe months, and in addition, there were great tidal waves sweeping in overland, followed by majestic earthquakes. There are those who refer to the vapor canopy, which to some extent is said to have covered the skies, and they ask the question if this would have been enough to create this effect, perhaps in correlation with the melting ice caps. I would say, no, because the sources are telling us that there was more going on than just these two things, although again, they may have contributed or been used intentionally as part of the plan to flood the earth. Author and researcher R. A. Boulay speculates, by using old rabbinical legends as his sources, that it was a cosmic event, which also caused changes in the position of the stars. Two stars are said to have been moved from the constellation of the Pleiades, and these were replaced by two stars from the Bear constellation. According to these sources, Boulay says, there were also changes in the sun and the moon, although these changes are not specified. These ideas are highly interesting, and some of the events may have occurred as a part of the plan, but the question is what really happened during the deluge, and what happened afterward, something we will look into in the next paper. In the post-diluvian times soon after the flood, Enki and his son made drastic changes to Earth's position in the solar system. Interestingly enough, the rabbinical legends seem to have picked up on this. We know that Ninurta was the final person in charge of instigating the flood, and what seems to be in common amongst most sources is that Ninurta was actually here in the solar system when he started the event. In other words, he left Gaia after talking with his brother in the mountains, but returned again to complete the work. I would presume he came through his own old Saturn stargate, which probably wasn't very well protected at the time because Enki knew that the deluge was inevitable, so he let his brother in. Also, as we shall see, Enki had additional plans, which included letting Ninurta and his helpers in. Not only that, Enki, in the Gilgamesh epic, in his role as Nergal, syncretism at play again, helped to pull out the dams, and Adad, possibly another of Enki's aliases, created the storms. With the first light of dawn a black cloud came from the horizon, it thundered within where Adad, lord of the storm was riding. In front over hill and plain, Shulit and Hanish, heralds of the storm, led on. Then the gods of the abyss rose up, Nergal pulled out the dams of the nether waters, Ninurta the warlord threw down the dikes, and the seven judges of hell, the Anunnaki, raised their torches, lighting the land with their livid flame. The gods of the abyss, as described here, are those of the underworld, the gods who had been, and still are, ruling this planet, and the ones who enslaved mankind. Nergal, as Enki, is of course the one ultimately in charge. The alien invaders force leadership, here called the seven judges of hell, who they are will be revealed in one of the last papers of this level of learning. Interesting in the above passage, however, is that when push came to shove, the Anunnaki, the alien invaders, decided to help with the deluge after all, and I will soon reveal their real motives behind this. I will show how Enki played both sides in this whole drama. He was not telling the truth to the Orion Council about his plans, of course, and he had figured out how to use their decision in his own favor, after he had infiltrated Satanya with his own men. Once the deluge began, panic broke out on the planet, and people and animals fled everywhere. Animals, from instinct, looked for higher ground, and because of that, many of them survived. Some humans survived as well, those who were lucky enough to get up in the high mountains in time, together with some of the anomalies, such as giants and other miscellaneous creatures. However, the majority of life on Earth disappeared in the flood, and even those who survived afterward would have a hard time staying alive because of lack of food. Cannibalism became common again. In fact, the majority of those who survived the flood died in the aftermath. The Saturn Stargate closed. When the job was done, and the flood was sustaining itself, a series of things happened, one after the other at a rapid pace. Enki was executing his plans. Before Ninurta had the chance to let his MacWarriors enter through the Saturn Stargate, Enki attacked Ninurta and his helpers, who had assisted him in instigating the flood. A quick battle took place outside the Earth's atmosphere, but the numbers were against Ninurta and his men. They all had to flee out of the solar system through the Stargate, taken by surprise. Little did they know that Enki had his spies positioned all the way up in Satania and the palace, and thus knew everything about Khan Enlil's and Ninurta's plans to take over the solar system and put Enki on trial. So, once Enki had killed or driven away all the MacWarriors, he quickly closed the Saturn Stargate. No one could now leave or enter the solar system that way without Enki's permission. The solar Stargate, and other stargates, leading into Eridu from outside, were shut down as well. The solar system was now totally in Enki's hands. Also, while everybody was concentrating on instigating the flood, Enki had taken Utnapishtim and his ark off the planet. In other words, the Ark of Noah was built as a spaceship and not as a boat. It was meant to float on the primordial waters, and not on the earthly oceans. Although Noah came back, it's questionable if we will ever find the correct Noah's Ark here on Earth. Some say they have already discovered it in the same place the Bible put it, but there is no real evidence showing that this was actually the Ark of Noah. The space ark hypothesis makes sense in the context, too, because it would be too casual for Enki to hope for the ark to survive the flood, jeopardizing all the DNA which was stored on board. All that was required was that the ark accidentally hit a big rock, the side or top, of a mountain, or any other obstacle, and it would potentially sink. Better then was to remove the whole ark from the surface of the planet. Of course, if this is true, Noah/Utnapishtim was not the builder of the ark, either. If we read the ancient texts, we see that it doesn't say that he was the only builder of the ark, but that he had help from friends. Because Noah/Utnapishtim was Enki's son, it is reasonable to think that these friends were indeed of the invaders, and they were the real spaceship builders. The real trick with interpreting the old scriptures is to be able to read what is not written in them. There are also indications, given to me by an anonymous source, that the ark story is indeed two stories in one. The DNA stored in the ark was later used by Enki to create an updated Homo sapiens sapiens, the modern man, but was also used elsewhere, such as to create hybrids in the Sirius system and in Alpha Draconis. If so, we do indeed have cousins out there, who are genetically closer to us than any other star races out there, possibly. This is a hypothesis well worth pondering, especially as it comes from two separate sources, unfamiliar with each other, the Pleiadians and one of my anonymous sources. The result is, however, that in order to start all over and create a new race of human hybrids, Enki needed to do so without interruption. Therefore, he figured out how to close the Saturn Stargate, chased off the Council of Saturn, who were sitting in the rings of Saturn and up until then had been serving the Orion Empire, set up his own council, and put up the infamous grid around the Earth, which is still there as of this writing. By taking these actions, Enki had the entire solar system to himself to do whatever he wished to, without any serious interference from the council or others. His creations, for the most part, were destroyed and gone, but on the other hand, he now had a great opportunity to start all over with the intention to once again create a slave race, but this time, he would do it differently. Hence, he also built the Between Life Area, BLA, in the Ether one of the dimensions, where he captured souls who died on Earth and needed to be recycled into the system again with full amnesia. He wanted to make sure that as few souls as possible escaped. He couldn't afford to lose souls that he had already manipulated throughout an entire earthly lifetime. This way, these souls always came back, and the manipulation could continue from where it ended the life before. The alien invader force was now in control of the Saturn Stargate, and they had defeated Ninurta, he who once threw their own king Enki out of Orion. Previously, Ninurta, as Archangel Michael, was the one who defeated them all. Hence, Ninurta was looked upon, by the invaders, as a war god. By defeating Ninurta for the second time, the alien invaders' force members all took on the title of warlords, although they knew that under equal circumstances, Ninurta was unbeatable. Still, they could at least show that they were almost as powerful as he was, at least, that's how they looked at it. Some of the invaders' force members were kings over their own star systems under Enki's sovereign command, and they now started calling themselves Khan Kings, as a reference to Orion and the Ka. Others referred to themselves as overlords. Prince Lucifer, or maybe I should say Khan Enki, now had it all well set up. Some afterthoughts. I have done my very best to analyze the deluge story, trying to see it from everybody's perspective, and am working on understanding how the beings involved came to their decisions and conclusions. This doesn't mean that we humans necessarily have to agree with any of it. If we put ourselves in Khan Enlil's, Queen Nin's, and Prince Ninurta's situations, they had seen their paradise, with an almost perfect primordial womankind walking the earth, and they had seen the lion sleep with the lamb in Ninurta's golden age and his Eden mountain paradise. They had watched their original experiment reach a point in the evolution which exceeded their own expectations, when Lucifer came and destroyed their entire creation. The living library, although mainly preserved, was heavily interfered with, and womankind was being transformed into a watered-down mankind, which was no longer androgynous, but needed a man and a woman to reproduce. Their connection with Orion was gone. Earth became a lower 3D prison, where the watered-down version of the Orion creation became slaves, and lost all memory of whom they were and where they came from. In addition, Lucifer decided to enlighten a select elite of this humankind to let them have the knowledge on a need-to-know basis in order to rule over the rest. In these tumultuous antediluvian times, they also watched monstrous giants, who themselves were alien invaders, force experiments, multiply on Earth in great quantities, and when mankind couldn't sustain themselves anymore, they turned against them and devoured them. Then they began to sin against birds, beasts, reptiles, and fish. Moreover, they started eating each other and drank each other's blood. Things had gotten totally out of hand. For many millennia, the original planners had to watch this continue, and they couldn't do much about it. They had empathy for Lucifer's creation because their own creation was embedded in it, and many of the original souls, who had inhabited the Namlua humanoids, were now trapped in these watered-down, amnesiac bodies. The Namlua were Mother Goddess's children but were adopted by the Orion Council, who all loved these ladies of fire as if they were their own children. A mother, whether in human form or a goddess, doesn't want to kill her own children. One day, however, the Khan and his son, Ninurta, had seen enough. They couldn't stand to see mankind develop into what they had been manipulated into, and they saw no other way than to do something about it. We can argue if the first attempts were really good decisions, as the Queen said, but regardless of whether we agree with the Khan or not, I can see why he ordered the flood. Who knows where mankind would have been today if there had been no interaction at all? Just a thought, and I'm sure people have their own personal opinions about this. Thorkild Jacobsen, 1904–93, was a Danish historian who wrote 2 books that included the events described in this paper, and he's also been cited here. He wrote in A History of Mesopotamian Religion, 1976, the following about the struggle between Enki and Father Enlil. The modern reader may well feel T. had Enlil, easily frightened, ready to weep. Insensitive to others, frustrated at every turn by the clever Enki, cuts a rather poor figure. Not so. The ultimate power of Enlil, the flood, stuns ancient imagination and compels respect. Another important reason why Khan Enlil would take drastic actions was that he apparently is very much against slavery, and watching how his own kind, being Enki and some of the invaders, were mating with humans was too much for him. After trying everything he could think of, he found it better to wipe out all creation than to keep watching this drama for yet another second. Before we continue, let's stop here for a moment. So far, we have had many discussion about Enki's actions in this flood scenario, so let's discuss Khan Enlil for a minute. To us humans, it may sound pretty grim and horrific to send a plague on mankind. From having read our history books about the plague in the Middle Ages and the Black Death as well, we know what a horrible death this brings to the person who gets sick. Why would the King of Orion do such a thing? This may be hard for us humans to understand, and I'm going to do my best to explain this from an ET perspective, from beings who are far more advanced in both the shamanic and technological aspects. Khan Enlil, from where he sits, has access to the highest of dimensions, which can only be accessed from inside the Orion Empire that typically doesn't just include the star constellation Orion, which may just be a location that is being used to bring about a thought form, an idea of a vast empire that stretches from the lowest to the absolute highest unthinkable dimensions, where void is actually void in its real implication. The Empire has outposts stretching through the entire universe and beyond and has very little to do with our galaxy alone. For simplicity's sake, let's say that in the Andromeda Galaxy, there is another species, who just like mankind is trying to figure out how the universe works. Would the Queen of the Stars and the King of the Stars call the Empire Orion when talking to these Andromedans? Probably not. They would possibly call it something that is familiar to that star race, such as a constellation known to them. Orion in that sense has nothing to do with it, it's just a focus point. In an infinite realm, where the higher selves of the Khan and the Queen exist, anything is possible, and anything can be done. On one level, Father Enlil, the Khan, is the Lord of Nature, whereas, Enki is the one who is overriding it with technology, as part of his revenge. Hence, every act Father Enlil is taking, his son is counteracting by using technology. This makes the father furious, particularly as his stepson is not only going against his, Khan Enlil's, own will, but that of the entire Orion Council. When I look at this entire scenario, it is really a war and a struggle between the gods, and we humans are the ones who sit between them and become the target for them shooting their ammunition toward each other. Father Enlil is a co-creator of the living library, and for eons, he's been agitated over Enki's actions here on Earth, and it seems that when he had enough, he really had enough, although it can't all be blamed on him, as he also had the entire council pressure him to come to the conclusion to do something. The council, on the other hand, had pressure from other star races to intervene. Apparently, the Khan didn't want to eradicate the entire human race, and therefore started with addressing the overpopulation. He did it in the way he was the expert, by using nature, and this time he used it against his creation. Enki did his counteracts in the way he was the expert, with technology and science. Another way of looking at it is that Enki actually didn't care about his creation at all at this point. All he cared about was to counteract Khan Enlil's actions by using technology to override everything his father did, regardless of what it was. He wanted to infuriate his father, as a spoiled child who refuses to listen to logic would. Then, of course, there were also more sophisticated plans behind the plans. One thing I have learned since I started working on all these papers, from level 1 through level 4, is that we humans think we understand how ETS/the gods think and operate. We are good at assuming things when it comes to ETS, assumptions that are far from correct. The reason why we are so incorrect is because we compare them with ourselves. If we are and react in a certain way, the ETs can't be too much different seems to be how we think. Unfortunately, that is usually incorrect. My experience is that we don't really understand them, and they don't really understand us, but both of us are curious to find out about one another. So why are we humans so different? It's because of what we've discussed many times in these papers. We are the experiment, and this experiment is making us quite unique. We have a wide range of emotions that we need in order to communicate with nature, more so in the future than we do now. To be able to communicate with plants, rocks, and animals, we need to be able to feel and be very perceptive to certain frequencies. Also, if we didn't have a wide range of emotions, we would get bored in 3D after a while. Having emotions usually makes things more exciting, and it makes us curious about ourselves and our environment, with or without the alien force suppression. The ETs are not emotionless, but they don't have our types of emotions at all. The third dimension is light trapped in matter, which makes things more solid, and thus creates a reality in which beings can live and interact. Hence, the learning curve here is often quite steep. During the nanosecond, it was steeper than it has ever been. ETs, who live in many dimensions simultaneously, some call them transdimensional, and can energize certain realities at will, are not that careful when it comes to physical bodies and such. They see bodies as dispensable, they are only vessels or vehicles for the soul, so if the bodies get destroyed, souls can get new ones if they so wish. Death to aliens is next to nothing. It's similar to when you get into your car and drive to your destination and then step out of it, not a big deal. The car is in this case the body, and you, the driver, are the soul. If you wreck the car, it may be inconvenient, but you can get a new one fairly quickly. Most invaders, but by all means not all of them, can nano-travel, something the Pleiadians, interestingly enough, brought up as well in a very recent lecture. Some of the alien invaders' force need bodies and inter- or transdimensional spaceships in order to travel from here to there, but they can jump from body to body just as we jump from car to car. Others can nano-travel. I am not sure if the Pleiadians have read my papers, but again, in a very recent lecture, they compared nano-travel with Star Trek, and the character Q. Is this a coincidence, or are they citing my papers? It doesn't matter which, of course, but I found it quite jaw-dropping. Also, the Pleiadians have talked endlessly about the alien invaders' force, Anunnaki, in their lectures recently. They say that the Anunnaki actually have been here all the time, something I have claimed too, and we humans are soon going to meet with them. This can be both good or bad, according to them. They also say, just as I have, that the Anunnaki are the ETs that have visited us in different disguises over the centuries. They are the ones who gave us technology, they are the ones who instigated the Technology Transfer Programs, TTP, and made contact with the US government in the early 1950s. They are also the ones whom Hitler was in contact with. People are talking about all these different star races, such as the Dracos, the Nordics, the Greys, the Reptilians, and so on, but in reality, they all belong to the same group of ETs, the Alien Invaders Force. Disinformation agents are trying to separate these ET races, saying they have different agendas, but this is nonsense. The alien invaders are the ETs that are here on this planet right now, and they have been here for centuries. What about the good ETs? They certainly exist and are the great majority out there, but this is Enki's domain, or so he believes, and to say that the ET races I mentioned above are not working together in order to keep us enslaved is incorrect. It's very important that we understand this. We also need to understand that shape-shifting is a piece of cake for interdimensional beings, and therefore, discussing Dracos and Reptilians becomes quite pointless. The alien invaders do have bodies on an interdimensional level, and some of them may be of reptilian nature, but these beings can take on any shape or form if they like. This is very important to keep in mind. Thus, researching and trying to catalog and categorize these star races, based on their agendas, often becomes a waste of time. The Pleiadians are Enkiites, and they are telling us that the two brothers, Enki and Enlil, are here right now, fighting for power. On the flip side, they also claim that Enki is no longer the irresponsible genetic entrapper that he once was, but he has changed a lot, while Enlil is still pretty much the same stern, morally and ethically steadfast character to the extreme. They want Enki to be our teacher in the age of Aquarius, and they say that he will change the frequency of the planet, so we can get more access to our dormant DNA. I wholeheartedly disagree with the above because my research clearly indicates the opposite. The Pleiadians are very much siding Sichan still, and they are setting us up for something we will regret. Therefore, please use discernment. In general, higher-level ETs know that our human bodies are designed to do things that are unique, and they understand the importance of the original experiment, but if it comes down to it, they are ready to wash the plate clean. This is why a more advanced God can sometimes make decisions that seem horrendous to us, but are not big deals to them. The soul lives on. This is usually the point where ETs and humans stop understanding each other. We have amnesia, and we usually have bonds with family members and friends. Once our body gets destroyed, we become disconnected from those we love, afraid we won't find each other again. This is a big thing for us. The ETs, on the other hand, know that we will find each other again, and therefore think it's irrelevant. However, they don't possess our range of emotions, which can be both our strength and our downfall. I know that in the future, we need a more open discussion about this between star races and ourselves. In any case, the above probably explains how Enlil could make the decisions he did when he ordered a plague, a drought, and starvation here on Earth. This, in addition to ordering the flood, is what I believe is the main reason why mankind is biased toward Enki and usually looks at Enlil as the bad guy in the drama. After all, Enki saved us when we starved, he gave us fish, he stopped the plague, and he saved the human race, the DNA and his own elite, from the flood, while Father Enlil did everything he could to have his orders executed, which would lead to mankind's demise. However, in certain religions, in Christianity in particular, the followers totally agree with Enlil's decision to wipe out humanity, being under the impression that mankind was sinful and didn't respect God enough. Only Noah and his family were righteous enough to be allowed to survive the deluge, and from him, all humans of today stem, according to religion. Therefore, it all depends on from which angle we are looking at this. My personal viewpoint is that we humans indeed are caught in the middle of something that is much bigger than us, a cosmic war and a galactic conflict in which we are sometimes the prize and sometimes the sacrifice. It's easy, if we look at the flood story shallowly, to take sides in this conflict and argue that Enki did the right thing when he tried to save mankind, but we also need to remember that he didn't do it for our sake, but for his own. He was the one who had plans for us, he was the one who had unresolved issues with Orion, and he was the one who wanted us here as slaves, not as his equals or his pupils. Even after the flood, he kept us in ignorance, actually, even more so, as we shall see. Also, when we listen to the Pleiadians, we can, if we look carefully, see the same agenda repeat itself all over again. Once again, according to them, Enki wants to save mankind from the evil Enlil. It's like a broken record. Morally, There are a lot of gray areas, it's not black and white. This is why it's so important to stand on our own feet and claim our own sovereignty over our body, avatar, and our divine fire. Every nation, every planet or star system, and every empire has its own laws and rules. As we can see in the Atrahasis epic, the goddess was totally against creating the flood, but there was nothing she could do after the council had voted and shared their arguments. As long as we are slaves, and an ignorant species that can stand our ground, others are going to make decisions for us, just as we make decisions for our pets, and not until we have broken out from our slavery can we avoid being the effect of other beings' decisions. So, however we bend and twist it, it comes back to that it's entirely up to us. This is, in itself, nothing bad because in the end we need to earn our freedom, or we won't be able to keep it and maintain it, but it's hard work, work that has just begun, with a long way left to go.